You just saved my life, and I never forget a debt. Come work for me, and I'll change your life forever.
When a customized armored Maybach skidded off the rain-slicked highway and slammed into the ditch outside Rusty's diner in the dead of night, Caleb thought it was just another wealthy driver out of their depth. But when three men in tactical gear stepped out of a trailing SUV with suppressed weapons drawn, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. They weren't there to help the woman trapped in the back seat. They were there to finish a job. For the first time since he left the SEAL teams, Caleb felt the familiar, icy calm wash over him. He looked at his 6-year-old daughter sleeping in the booth, tucked his diner apron into his jeans, and reached for the heavy cast-iron coffee pot. Someone was about to make a fatal mistake. The rain in Seattle hadn't stopped for 3 days, washing the neon glow of Rusty's diner into a blurred, bloody smear across the wet asphalt. Caleb Mitchell wiped down the counter with a rag that smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. At 34, his face carried the hard, weathered lines of a man who had seen too much sand, too much blood, and too many friends loaded onto C-17 transport planes in flag-draped aluminum boxes. After 12 years in Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DevGRU, he had traded his rifle for a spatula to be a father. His daughter, Lily, was asleep in the corner booth, her small chest rising and falling beneath a faded denim jacket. She had severe pediatric asthma, and the medications were drowning Caleb in debt. The night shift at Rusty's barely covered the rent on their cramped one-bedroom apartment, let alone the inhalers and specialist visits. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the low hum of the refrigerator. Caleb didn't look up immediately. He was used to the midnight drifters. But the heavy, synchronized thud of tactical boots on the linoleum made him freeze. 3 men walked in. They wore dark rain slickers, but Caleb's trained eyes immediately registered the bulk of Kevlar vests beneath the nylon. He noted their positioning, one taking the door, one moving to the blind spot by the restrooms, and the leader advancing toward the center of the room. They had the disciplined, sweeping gaze of operators clearing a room. And under the leader's coat, the unmistakable rigid outline of a suppressed, compact submachine gun. A moment later, the door flew open again. A woman desperately wheeled herself inside, drenched and gasping for air. Her manual wheelchair was top tier, ultralight titanium, but the wheels were clogged with mud. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer ruined by the storm. Her eyes, a striking, piercing blue, darted around the empty diner before locking onto the men. "Victoria Sterling," the leader said, his voice a low gravel that barely carried over the rain outside. "End of the line. The boss says it's time to cash out." Victoria's jaw tightened. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply glared at him with a terrifying, aristocratic defiance. "Preston sent you," she said, her voice steady despite the shivering of her shoulders. "He's cheaper than I thought. Hiring local muscle instead of doing it himself." "Nothing local about us, ma'am," the man smirked, drawing the weapon. Caleb's mind snapped into a hyper-focused overdrive. Time slowed. He had 3 targets, heavily armed, body armor. He had a glass coffee pot and a 6-inch serrated steak knife resting on the cutting board behind the counter. Lily was 15 feet away, out of the immediate line of fire, but a stray bullet through the booths could be lethal. There was no time to think, only to act. "Hey!" Caleb barked, stepping out from behind the counter. The leader instinctively turned his head toward the shout. That split second was all Caleb needed. With a vicious, practiced motion, he hurled the boiling hot glass coffee pot directly at the leader's face. It shattered against the man's cheekbone, sending scalding liquid and jagged glass across his eyes. The man screamed, his finger pulling the trigger in a reflexive spasm. A suppressed thwip, thwip, thwip tore into the ceiling tiles, raining plaster down on the counter. Caleb was already moving. He vaulted the counter, clearing it with the explosive power of a coiled spring. He landed right in front of the blinded leader, driving the heel of his palm upward into the man's chin with bone-crunching force. The man's head snapped back, his lights going out instantly. He crumpled to the floor. The man by the door raised his pistol. Caleb grabbed the falling leader's submachine gun by the hot suppressor, ripping it from his limp grip, and hurled the heavy weapon like a club straight at the second gunman's chest. It struck him hard, staggering him backward against the glass door. Caleb closed the distance in 2 strides. The gunman tried to recover, bringing his pistol to bear, but Caleb deflected the barrel outward with his left forearm while stepping inside the man's guard. He delivered a brutal, crushing knee to the man's groin, followed by a sharp, twisting elbow strike to the temple. The second man dropped like a stone. The third man, positioned near the restrooms, had a clear shot. He leveled his weapon at Caleb. "Daddy!" Lily screamed, jolted awake by the commotion. The distraction was fatal for the gunman. As his eyes flicked toward the child for a microsecond, a heavy ceramic mug thrown with pinpoint accuracy by Victoria Sterling caught him squarely in the throat. He gagged, lowering his weapon for a fraction of a second. Caleb closed the gap, grabbed the man's gun hand, twisted the wrist until a loud snap echoed through the diner and swept his legs out from under him. As the man fell, Caleb delivered a precise, open-handed strike to his carotid artery. The diner fell dead silent, save for the rain lashing against the windows. It had taken exactly 7 seconds. Caleb stood, chest heaving slightly, his knuckles bruised. He kicked the weapons away from the unconscious men and walked over to Victoria. She was staring at him, her chest rising and falling, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of shock and intense calculation. "You're not a fry cook," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "And you're not a local," Caleb replied, his tone flat. He turned to his daughter. "Lily, grab your backpack. We're leaving before the cops get here." "Wait," Victoria said, grabbing his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Who are you?" "Nobody," Caleb said, pulling his hand away gently. "Just a guy who hates seeing blood on his floor." The police investigation made the local news, but the details were heavily sanitized. Failed robbery at Highway Diner, no mention of suppressors, body armor, or the fact that the men were carrying military-grade encrypted comms. Caleb knew a cover-up when he saw one. He took a leave of absence from the diner, moving Lily into a cheap motel under a fake name, sleeping with a loaded Glock 19 under his pillow. 4 days later, the knock came. Caleb had his gun leveled at the door before the second rap echoed. He peered through the peephole. Standing outside in the driving rain was an elderly gentleman in a bespoke Savile Row suit, holding a black umbrella. He looked like an English butler who had accidentally wandered into a slum. Caleb opened the door an inch, the chain still engaged. "Mr. Mitchell," the man said, his voice crisp and British. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I represent Miss Victoria Sterling. She would like to have a word with you." "Tell her I'm busy," Caleb said, moving to shut the door. "She expected you might say that," Arthur said smoothly, slipping a thick, cream-colored envelope through the crack. "She also asked me to inform you that Dr. Eris Thorne at Seattle Children's Hospital has received an anonymous donation. Your daughter's medical debts have been cleared, in full. Furthermore, a trust has been established to cover all future respiratory treatments." Caleb froze. He looked at the envelope, then at Arthur, his jaw clenched. "You people shouldn't have dug into my life." "When one is saved by a ghost, Mr. Mitchell, one tends to search for the grave," Arthur replied calmly. "Miss Sterling is waiting in the car. Please, it is a matter of life and death. Hers, specifically." 10 minutes later, Caleb was sitting in the back of an armored black SUV. Victoria sat opposite him. In the harsh daylight, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the exhaustion masked by flawless makeup and a posture of absolute authority. "Chief Petty Officer Caleb Mitchell," Victoria said, holding a slim tablet. "Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, 12 years in Dev Gru. Honorable discharge following an IED blast in Syria that left you with minor shrapnel scarring and, according to this, severe survivor's guilt. You left the teams because your wife passed away in a car accident while you were deployed, leaving you a single father." Caleb's eyes turned to ice. "Stop talking, or I'm getting out of this car." Victoria lowered the tablet. "I apologize. I don't mean to be callous. I am a woman who thrives on information, and right now, I have a desperate lack of it regarding my own survival." She leaned forward. "I am the CEO of Sterling Dynamics. We manufacture advanced guidance systems for the Department of Defense. 6 months ago, I was involved in a helicopter crash during a site visit in Alaska. The official report said mechanical failure. It severed my spinal cord, putting me in this chair permanently. But it wasn't an accident. It was sabotage. And the men at the diner? Caleb asked. Private military contractors, specifically a black book outfit called Aegis Solutions. Highly trained, completely deniable. They were hired to finish the job the helicopter crash started. Why? Because in 2 weeks, Sterling Dynamics is voting on a merger with a massive Chinese conglomerate. A merger that would essentially hand over next-generation American defense tech to a foreign power. I am the majority shareholder, and I am voting no. My chief operating officer, Preston Hayes, is orchestrating the deal. If I am dead before the board meeting, my shares go into a blind trust controlled by the board. The merger goes through. Preston walks away with $1 billion. Victoria looked him dead in the eye. My security detail is compromised. The local police are paid off. The FBI won't act without hard proof, which Preston is too smart to leave behind. I am completely alone, Mr. Mitchell, and I need a ghost. I'm out of that life, Caleb said softly. I have a daughter to think about. Which is exactly why you should take my offer, Victoria countered. I am offering you $2 million a year to be my personal director of security. You and Lily will move into my estate. It is a fortress. She will have a private tutor, the best medical care on earth, and a life completely insulated from poverty. In exchange, you keep me breathing until the board meeting in 14 days. Caleb looked out the tinted window at the rain. $2 million. It was blood money. But it was also a future for Lily. A future where she wouldn't have to wheeze through the night in a damp apartment. He turned back to Victoria. If I do this, I do it my way. Total operational control. I vet everyone. I change your schedules. I dictate your movements. If I tell you to jump, you ask how high. Understand? Victoria offered a faint, razor-sharp smile. I'm in a wheelchair, Caleb. I don't jump. Then you roll, Caleb said. Fast. The Sterling estate was less a home and more a modernized medieval keep located on a private peninsula overlooking Puget Sound. High concrete walls, topped with wrought iron, concealed advanced motion sensors and thermal cameras. But as Caleb drove through the massive iron gates, with Lily asleep in the passenger seat, his tactical mind immediately began cataloging the flaws. The security guards at the gate were heavy-footed and complacent. The camera angles left a massive blind spot near the eastern seawall. The communication frequencies the guards were using were unencrypted civilian bands. It wasn't just poor security, it was a deliberate invitation for an assassination. Victoria met them in the grand foyer. The interior was a breathtaking display of glass, dark wood, and modern art. Arthur was by her side, holding a silver tray with hot chocolate for Lily. Welcome to your new home, Lily, Victoria said, her voice softening in a way Caleb hadn't heard before. She wheeled herself closer, putting herself at eye level with the little girl. Arthur will show you to your room. It has a view of the ocean, and I had them stock it with all the art supplies you could ever want. Lily, shy but wide-eyed, looked at her father. Caleb gave a slow nod. Go ahead, sweetie. I need to talk to Miss Sterling. Once Arthur and Lily disappeared up the grand glass staircase, Caleb turned to Victoria, his demeanor instantly shifting to pure business. Your security is a joke, Caleb said flatly. Your perimeter guards are contractors from a discount firm. The cameras are misaligned. Whoever set this up wants you dead. My head of security was handpicked by Preston Hayes while I was in the hospital recovering from the crash, Victoria replied bitterly. His name is David Granger. Fire him, Caleb said. Right now. Give me his severance papers. I'll deliver them myself. Caleb, if I fire him without cause, Preston will know I suspect him. It might accelerate his timeline. He sent an Aegis hit squad to a diner. The timeline is already at 0, Caleb said, walking over to a massive window overlooking the dark waters of the Sound. Granger leaves today. I bring in 2 men from my old unit, guys I trust with my life. We lock down the physical perimeter, and we need to figure out how they tracked you to that diner in the first place. Victoria sighed, rubbing her temples. I was using a burner phone. I drove a car from the company pool, not my personal vehicle. Then there's a tracker on the chair, Caleb said. Victoria blinked, looking down at the high-tech wheels. Preston had this chair custom built for me by our engineering division. Caleb knelt beside her. May I? She nodded. Caleb ran his hands under the titanium seat, feeling along the battery housing for the motorized assist. His fingers brushed against a tiny, anomalous, magnetic ridge near the rear axle. He pulled it free. It was a GPS microtransmitter, barely the size of a coin. He held it up to the light. Military grade. Active ping. Victoria's face drained of color. He's been tracking my every move for 6 months. And now he knows I found it, Caleb said, crushing the transmitter under the heel of his boot, which means he knows you're no longer playing the victim. The next week was a blur of tactical restructuring. Caleb brought in 2 former SEALs, Jackson and Miller, quiet professionals who immediately purged the estate of Hayes' security personnel. They set up a nerve center in the basement, establishing overlapping fields of fire, drone surveillance, and biometric locks. Despite the tension, a strange domestic rhythm developed. Caleb spent his days auditing Sterling Dynamics cybersecurity and shadow-tailing Victoria to her closed-door meetings. At night, he would find Victoria in the library, helping Lily with her math homework. Underneath the cold, calculating billionaire exterior, Caleb saw a woman fiercely protective of the innocent. She had built an empire in a world dominated by ruthless men, and they had broken her back for it. Caleb found himself admiring her resilience more than he cared to admit. On the 8th day, the war went hot. Victoria had to attend a mandatory preliminary board meeting at the Sterling Dynamics downtown headquarters. It was inescapable. Caleb insisted on a 3-car decoy convoy. Victoria rode with Caleb in an armored transport van disguised as a plumbing vehicle. As they descended into the underground parking garage of the Sterling Tower, the hairs on Caleb's arms stood up. The garage was too quiet. The attendant's booth was empty. Jackson. Caleb spoke into his throat mic. What's the thermal sweep of the garage look like? Static. Jackson, report. Nothing but a harsh, jamming hiss in his earpiece. Hold on tight, Caleb said to Victoria, throwing the heavy van into reverse. Before the tires could grip the concrete, a massive explosion rocked the upper levels of the garage. Concrete dust rained down, and the reinforced steel security gates at the top of the ramp slammed shut, locking them in. From the shadows of the lower levels, 4 black SUVs' headlights snapped on, illuminating the van. Caleb, Victoria whispered, gripping the armrests of her chair. Stay low, Caleb growled, drawing his weapon and slamming his foot on the gas, driving straight toward the blinding lights. They were trapped in the Viper's nest, and the only way out was through. The heavy Ford Transit van, retrofitted with B6, level ballistic steel, and inch-thick polycarbonate glass, roared like a caged beast as Caleb slammed the accelerator to the floorboards. The 4 black SUVs fanned out, attempting to form a steel barricade at the base of the parking garage ramp. Brace yourself! Caleb roared over the sudden, deafening chatter of automatic gunfire. Sparks showered the dimly lit garage as 5.56mm rounds chewed into the van's reinforced grille and skipped off the sloped windshield. Spiderweb fractures blossomed across the glass, but the polycarbonate held. Caleb didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on the narrowest gap in their blockade, the space between the center SUV and the concrete support pillar. Caleb, they're going to box us in, Victoria shouted, her hands gripping the steel safety handles welded beside her anchored wheelchair. Despite the chaos, her voice was remarkably steady. Not if we don't stop, Caleb grunted. He didn't hit the brakes. Instead, he downshifted, letting the engine whine hit a screaming crescendo and threw the steering wheel hard right, then violently left, utilizing a modified pit maneuver using the sheer mass of the armored van. The reinforced steel bumper caught the rear quarter panel of the Aegis SUV just as it tried to close the gap. The impact sounded like a bomb detonating. The 2-ton SUV was violently spun on its axis, its tires screaming against the polished concrete before it slammed side-on into the load-bearing pillar. The airbags deployed in a cloud of white powder, neutralizing the driver and passenger instantly. Caleb punched through the opening, taking the van down to the sub-level 4 at breakneck speed. They have the upper exits locked down and they've jammed our comms, Caleb said, his eyes darting between the side mirrors and the labyrinth of concrete ahead. 2 remaining SUVs were already recovering, their headlights cutting through the dust, accelerating in pursuit. We can't go up, we go down. Sub-level 5 is a dead end, Victoria warned, frantically pulling a ruggedized tablet from her briefcase. "It's a maintenance bay for the HVAC chillers." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," Caleb replied. "Under your seat. Black Pelican case. Open it." Victoria unlatched the heavy waterproof case. Inside, resting on custom-cut foam, was a compact MK-18 CQBR assault rifle, complete with a holographic sight and a suppressor, alongside 4 loaded magazines. "Do you know how to use it?" Caleb asked, sliding the van around a tight corner, the tires smoking. "I manufacture the guidance systems for the Hellfire missile, Caleb. I know how a safety catch works," Victoria said coldly, racking the charging handle with a sharp, metallic clack. "Good. Don't shoot unless they breach the glass." Caleb hit the ramp to sub-level 5. As they descended, the lighting grew sparse, giving way to the massive, humming industrial chillers that regulated the 70-story Sterling Dynamics tower above them. The van hit the bottom floor, skidding to a halt near a massive, chain-link fence that cordoned off the city's subterranean drainage and utility tunnels. "Hold on," Caleb said. He didn't slow down. He aimed the van directly at the heavy chain-link gates. They crashed through the steel mesh, dragging the torn fencing beneath the chassis with a horrific screech. Caleb killed the headlights immediately, plunging them into the pitch-black utility tunnel. He flicked a switch on the dashboard, activating the van's military-grade infrared front-facing camera. The dashboard screen glowed green, illuminating the damp, cavernous tunnel ahead. Behind them, the pursuing SUVs hit the bottom floor, their headlights sweeping the empty maintenance bay. By the time the Aegis contractors realized the van had broken through the utility gates, Caleb had navigated a quarter-mile into the subterranean dark, effectively vanishing like a ghost. 10 minutes later, Caleb emerged from a forgotten storm drain access point in the industrial district of Sodo, miles away from the Sterling Tower. He drove the battered van into an abandoned shipping container yard, finally killing the engine inside a hollowed-out warehouse that smelled of rust and salt water. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing in their ears after the deafening roar of the ambush. Caleb exhaled slowly, checking his sidearm before turning to Victoria. She was pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the Mark 18, but she was entirely unharmed. "Are you hit?" he asked softly. "No," she breathed, lowering the weapon. She looked at the cracked bulletproof glass, then at Caleb. "You planned for the garage." "I planned for everything," Caleb said, unbuckling his harness. "Jackson and Miller are blind right now, but they have their standing orders. They're moving Lily to the secondary safe house, a fortified cabin up near Snoqualmie Pass. She's safe. But we have a massive problem. Preston just tried to execute me in broad daylight at my own corporate headquarters," Victoria said, anger finally replacing the shock in her eyes. "He's desperate." "Desperate men make mistakes," Caleb said, grabbing a tactical flashlight and moving to the rear of the van. He opened a secure locker, pulling out a hardened military laptop and a satellite uplink module. "But this doesn't make sense. If he kills you today, the board will demand a massive federal investigation. It will delay the merger with the Chinese by months, maybe years. Why accelerate the timeline to 0? Victoria frowned, taking the laptop from Caleb. "Unless the merger isn't the primary goal. Unless it's a smokescreen." She connected her encrypted tablet to the laptop, bypassing the local cellular networks, and using the satellite uplink to ping a ghost server she had hidden in Iceland. "When I took over Sterling Dynamics, I built a backdoor into the financial mainframe. Preston doesn't know about it. Only Arthur does." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, lines of code reflected in her piercing blue eyes. Caleb stood watch by the warehouse door, his rifle raised, monitoring the perimeter. "The Chinese conglomerate, Jinmao Heavy Industries," Victoria muttered, navigating through layers of encrypted firewalls. Their initial bid was unusually high, almost 40% above market value for our defense contracts. "I thought they just wanted the tech." She paused, her breath hitching. "What is it?" Caleb asked, not taking his eyes off the rain-slicked street outside. "It's not a merger," Victoria whispered, her voice laced with venom. "It's a bailout. Caleb, look at this." He stepped back to the van. The screen displayed a complex web of offshore wire transfers, shell companies in the Cayman Islands, and dummy corporations in Cyprus. "Preston hasn't just been managing the company," Victoria explained, her voice trembling with fury. He's been bleeding it dry. He's siphoned over $800 million from the Department of Defense R&D budget over the last 4 years. The money is gone. Caleb immediately understood the tactical reality. And if the quarterly audit happens next month, he's exposed. Federal prison. Treason charges. Exactly. But the Jinmao merger includes a total waiver of historical audits, absorbing our debts as part of the acquisition. The Chinese don't care about the missing money. They just want the missile guidance blueprints. Preston gets his billion-dollar payout. The missing funds are buried in the acquisition paperwork, and he walks away clean. She slammed her fist against the armored door of the van. If I show up to that board meeting today and vote no, the merger fails. The audit proceeds. Preston's entire life goes up in flames. He has to kill me today. The board vote is in 2 hours. Caleb checked his watch. It was 1:15 p.m. The vote was scheduled for 3 p.m. Then, we have to get you into that room, Caleb said, his voice dropping an octave. Caleb, the Sterling Tower is a fortress right now. Aegis contractors will be guarding every elevator, every stairwell. We barely escaped the basement. We can't just walk into the penthouse. Caleb offered a grim, predator's smile. He reached into his tactical vest, pulling out a blueprint of the Sterling Dynamics building he had memorized days ago. We don't walk, Caleb said. We breach. The 65th floor of the Sterling Dynamics Tower was an architectural masterpiece of frosted glass, brushed steel, and acoustic paneling. Inside the grand boardroom, 20 of the most powerful corporate directors in the defense industry sat around a massive mahogany table. The mood was somber, tense, and heavy with unspoken panic. At the head of the table stood Preston Hayes. He was in his late 50s, impeccably groomed, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than most cars. He looked appropriately devastated, though his dark eyes glittered with suppressed triumph. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Preston began, his voice a masterclass in feigned sorrow. As of 2 hours ago, local authorities informed me that an explosion occurred in our lower parking levels. While the details are still coming in, I must deliver the tragic news that our CEO, Victoria Sterling, is missing and presumed dead in the attack. A murmur of shock rippled through the room. The police are investigating this as an act of corporate terrorism, Preston continued smoothly, holding up a hand to quell the noise. In times of such unprecedented crisis, stability is our only shield. The market will open tomorrow, and if we do not show definitive leadership, our stock will plummet, and our defense contracts will be suspended by the Pentagon. He tapped a button on the table, projecting the Jinmao merger documents onto the massive 100-inch screen behind him. Under the bylaws of continuity of leadership, in the event of the CEO's incapacitation, the Chief Operating Officer assumes emergency proxy of all voting shares. I am calling for an immediate, binding vote to finalize the Jinmao acquisition. We must secure this company's future today. Outside the heavy oak doors of the boardroom, 4 Aegis mercenaries stood guard, armed with concealed weapons, their earpieces silent. They never heard Caleb coming. Having bypassed the main elevators by scaling the interior elevator maintenance shaft from the 60th floor, hoisting Victoria's wheelchair via a specialized tactical rigging pulley, Caleb had reached the executive level. Completely undetected, he moved like a shadow. He stepped out from the utility corridor behind the first 2 guards. With terrifying speed, Caleb grabbed the back of the first guard's collar, dragging him backward while simultaneously driving a knee into the second guard's spine. Before either man could draw a weapon, Caleb administered a precise, blood-choked sleeper hold on the first, while delivering a brutal palm strike to the second guard's temple, dropping him instantly. The remaining 2 guards by the boardroom doors reached for their sidearms. Caleb didn't hesitate. He drew his suppressed MK-23 USP. Pff, 2 rounds. Non-lethal, but instantly incapacitating one, shattering the right shoulder of the guard on the left, the second blowing through the kneecap of the guard on the right. Both men collapsed in agony, their weapons clattering uselessly to the thick carpet. Caleb holstered his weapon, keyed his radio. Clear. Bring her up. From the shadows, Arthur Pendleton, who had bravely insisted on joining the infiltration to assist Victoria, wheeled her forward. Victoria brushed a speck of dust off her ruined charcoal blazer. She looked like a battered queen returning to claim her throne. Ready? Caleb asked, resting his hand on the brass handles of the double doors. Kick them open, Victoria said icily. Inside the boardroom, Preston was handing out the signature pens. All in favor of the merger, please sig. Crash. The heavy oak doors exploded violently inward, rebounding off the walls with a thunderous crack. The board members jumped out of their seats. Caleb strode into the room first, his presence commanding, a suppressed weapon resting comfortably against his thigh. His eyes locked onto Preston, pinning the COO in place with the cold stare of a predator. A second later, Arthur wheeled Victoria Sterling into the center of the room. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the air from Preston Hayes' lungs. All the color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a freshly minted corpse. "Victoria," Preston stammered, taking a step back, knocking his chair over. "My God, we thought you were dead." "Not for lack of trying, Preston," Victoria said, her voice echoing off the acoustic panels. She wheeled herself directly to the head of the table. "Though your hitmen are surprisingly incompetent. Perhaps you shouldn't have paid them with embezzled funds." The board erupted into chaos. "Hitmen? Embezzled funds? What is the meaning of this?" demanded an elderly board member. "Arthur," Victoria commanded. Arthur pulled a flash drive from his pocket and slotted it into the boardroom console. The Jinmao merger documents vanished from the screen, replaced instantly by the encrypted ledgers, offshore bank routing numbers, and undeniable proof of the $800 million theft. "You're looking at the real reason Preston Hayes wanted this merger," Victoria announced, projecting her voice over the commotion. "Jinmao wasn't buying our tech. They were buying his debt. Preston has been siphoning R&D funds for 4 years. When I survived the helicopter crash he orchestrated in Alaska, he knew his time was running out. So, he hired Aegis Solutions to finish the job today." Preston's eyes darted wildly around the room. The exits were blocked by Caleb. The evidence was irrefutable. The bespoke suit suddenly looked like a prison uniform. "This is a fabrication!" Preston shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "She's unstable! The crash compromised her mind! Security! Get her out of here!" No one came. "Your security team is currently napping in the hallway," Caleb said, his voice a low, gravelly threat that chilled the room. "And the FBI is currently riding the elevators up to this floor." Arthur made a phone call from the lobby. Realizing he was trapped, the veneer of the sophisticated executive shattered. Preston lunged. He didn't go for Victoria. He went for the heavy crystal water pitcher on the table, aiming to smash it into the server console to destroy the flash drive. He didn't make it 2 steps. Caleb moved with blistering speed. He intercepted Preston, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it upward into a brutal, agonizing hammerlock. Preston screamed as Caleb slammed him face first into the polished mahogany table, pinning him there effortlessly. "Do not move," Caleb whispered directly into Preston's ear, pressing the barrel of the USP against the small of his back. "Or, I will make sure the only merger you participate in is with the concrete floor." Preston sobbed, his cheek pressed against the wood, utterly broken. The elevator dinged in the distance. Heavy boots and the sharp commands of federal agents echoed down the hallway. Victoria looked around the room at the stunned, silent board members. She adjusted her blazer, her posture perfect, her piercing blue eyes radiating absolute control. "The merger with Jinmao is officially canceled," Victoria stated calmly, "and I believe we have a vacancy for the position of Chief Operating Officer. Meeting adjourned." 6 months later, the relentless Seattle rain gave way to a brilliant golden sunset over the Sterling estate. Caleb Mitchell stood on the patio, watching his daughter Lily run across the manicured lawn, laughing as she chased Arthur's golden retriever. There was no wheezing, no inhalers, just the vibrant energy of a healthy child whose medical future was secure. The $800 million had been recovered. Preston Hayes was facing life in federal prison without parole, and Aegis Solutions had been dismantled by the Department of Justice. Behind Caleb, the soft whir of servos hummed. He turned to see Victoria stepping out onto the patio. She wasn't in her chair. Supported by an advanced, lightweight titanium exoskeleton, the first prototype from Sterling Dynamics' newly purged and refunded R&D division, she walked slowly, proudly, to his side. Caleb smiled, offering his arm not as her security detail, but as her partner. Some battles were meant to be fought alone, but the best victories were the ones shared. If this high-stakes story of loyalty, tactical brilliance, and a father's love kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a story where the ruthless get exactly what they deserve. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more intense, real-life drama stories. What would you have done in Caleb's shoes? Drop a comment below.